No one has ever shown that human emissions of carbon dioxide drive global warming.
We have a massive power, and it's the power to say no.
They put all these words on these flyers and it means nothing. It's garbage. We're all going to die!
Doctors are gaslighting patients.
If you keep silent, then this is what's going to happen. And they'll make us silent.
I would rather paper cut my eyelids than have anything to do with this.
We are one people, one flag, one Australia.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the ExCandidates. My name is Stephen Tripp. Adam, welcome back. You weren't with us yesterday. You had
G'day, Stephen. How you going?
You feeling okay, mate?
Oh yeah, not too bad. Thanks for all the viewers who sent messages, and a few people gave me a call to make sure that I was okay. So that's pretty cool. So thank you to all you guys. You know who you are. Face is a bit numb still. You can see it's a little bit swollen, but that's what happens when you kind of get like a dental surgery, sprung upon you one night before the big show. So, but anyway, I'm back today. So thanks for all your thoughts, and hopefully the swelling goes down and the pain eases up a fair bit. So we'll be all right.
Well, I got to say, you missed out on a really important discussion yesterday with Chris Martinson. It was I was amazed at how much expertise he has across so many different subjects. He was really, really interesting. So I know it was coming at 7 a.m. on a Saturday morning. Not many people were online at that time, but, we had to fit in with his schedule in America. So I really encourage people to head over to our Rumble and jump on and watch that episode. I think he raised a lot of good points.
To steal somebody's line from the movie industry, if you watch one episode of the ExCandidates, watch that one, and then watch all the other ones after it.
Okay, so we are coming live at the moment on Facebook and YouTube and Rumble. If you're on Facebook and on YouTube, you can comment. We'll also put the link in the chat later on if you want to join us and ask our special guests some questions. And Adam, we're also on Buy Me a Coffee. I'll put the link to Buy Me a Coffee in the chat in a moment, but we are going really well on Buy Me a Coffee. I've told you about some of them. We had 3 coffees bought by someone. They've just put their name as someone. I know who they are because I can tell by their email. But thank you to someone. I don't know if they want their name disclosed. Harry bought us 5 coffees.
Wow, thank you, Harry.
Harry said, "I do enjoy your podcast. Always interesting and informative. Would love to interview Craig Kelly." Well, we have reached out to Craig Kelly. We haven't had the opportunity to interview him yet, so hopefully that will happen in the future. But get this, Adam, I haven't told you about this one. Kim bought us 20 coffees this week.
20 coffees.
Yep.
Wow. Thank you, Kim.
She said, "I love this podcast and I love what you do. I can't always watch, but I listen. Truth, integrity, and questioning everything. Fan for life. Keep it up."
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, Kim. That's why we do it. We really do it because Anka down there, once we introduce him, he'll know for sure that we don't pay him to have his topics because there's no money on the table. We certainly aren't getting paid to do anything like that. All we try to do, and Stephen and I kind of made a bit of a deal with ourselves, is kind of like it's about getting factual information from experts. So we have a slight political background, Stephen and I, so we can kind of steer it towards politics and bits and pieces here, and a little bit more educated, say, in politics than the average punter. But what we try to do is make sure that our experts come on and really giving you an honest, whether you believe it or not or agree with it or not, but they give you their honest take on what they believe, their information and their expertise and their research has led, the way that it's led them. So that's what we do try to do. And thank you very much for the appreciation. It always helps people like us to keep this kind of thing happening.
And we really do appreciate it. It means so much to know that people are willing to give up their hard-earned money just to support us. And hey, I mean, that pays the subscription to StreamYard for a few months, and it really means a lot. So thank you for everyone out there. But on tonight's episode, we have a very special guest, and I'm really excited about this one because this is going to be a topic that we can really delve into, and I'm sure this expert will be able to shape our opinions a little bit more on this topic. But his name is Anka Sahin. He's a political commentator and immigration law expert. Prior to committing himself to a career in immigration, he worked for the European Union, both in development-related projects and as a professional translator and interpreter. and he taught English in New Zealand and in Turkey and in various schools and universities. Anka holds a bachelor's degree in politics, French and European studies, a master's degree in international relations, and he is a fellow at a number of professional organizations, including the Migration Institute of Australia, the Institute of Managers and Lenders Australia and New Zealand, and the Chartered Institute of Linguists in the UK. Anka speaks several languages, including French, Turkish, and Spanish, and of course English. And he is a keen traveler, having been to more than 80 countries in all 6 continents. How are you tonight, Anka? Welcome to the ExCandidates.
Thank you, Steve. I'm very well. Nice to be with you tonight.
No, it's a pleasure to have you. How do you get to 80 countries, and is there any that stand out to you?
I just love traveling. I started when I was at university. My dad was generous enough to fund my very first trip overseas. He paid for flight tickets for me to go to Southeast Asia, and I was away for 80 days. My very first overseas trip where I traveled independently. I was 21 at the time. And I got the travel bug as a result of that. And after that, once I started earning my own money, I made a point of trying to do as much travel as possible without spending a whole lot, cutting down on the luxury side of things and just really focusing on the experience. And that's what I've pretty much been doing. And it continued even after I got married and had a child. And nowadays, sometimes I go traveling with my 6-year-old, just the two of us, me and the boy.
Wow.
That's really awesome. I got to be honest with you, Anka. I am not really a good traveler. I don't like really leaving Campbelltown. I have traveled a little bit. I mean, I've got a European background. I've been home to my home, like my homeland, I guess. I'm born in Australia, but I've been to Malta and I've been to a few. I've been to Dubai. And a few of those, where else have I been? To America, and that's about the sum of it. But Bali as well. So it's always, what is it? Traveling's better education than actually what you get in school because you get to actually live it firsthand. But yeah, my hat goes off to you. I don't know how you can sit in those planes and I just don't like being that close to people, I guess.
Oh, well, look, I guess, yes, living in Australia, you got to put up with those long flights. But once you're over wherever you're going, it's, you realize the world is actually not that big and you can get to other places with minimal effort once you base yourself somewhere a bit more centrally. But yeah, look, it's to each their own, I guess. I really do enjoy, and I find that I become a different person when I travel. Like normally I'm not a morning person at all. I don't like mornings, and it takes a while for me to get going in the mornings and things like that. But when I'm traveling, you tell me I need to get up at 4 to catch a bus, I will, and it will be nothing. I'll be able to do it without any difficulty whatsoever. But at home, I'll just I'll get up like 10 to 9 and maybe roll out of bed and start working. Maybe. So, I'm a very different person.
So you're a migration specialist. How did you fall into that area, and why? Like, is it something you're really passionate about?
Well, I must enjoy it enough that I've been doing it nearly for 20 years now. It's an interesting field of practice. I find that a lot of people have fallen into it by chance, and that's exactly what happened with me. Back when I was living in New Zealand and my wife was doing her PhD, I was doing some teaching at the time, but it wasn't on a permanent basis. I was teaching English. I wasn't on a permanent basis, and I was looking for something that would be a bit more secure, that would be a bit more permanent. And I came across an ad that was looking for a person to do migration assessments, and they said training would be provided. So, I applied, and I was very upfront, and I did tell them I didn't really have any experience in that field. And they said, don't worry, we prefer people without experience because we want to train them up ourselves in the way we do things here. I'm like, okay, well, that's really good. And it started off like that way. And then they put me through the course to become registered as a migration agent, I at the time you had to do a distance education course, and then you had to come to Australia to one of the state capitals to sit the exam, and the exam had a pass rate of about 25%, so it was quite a tough one, but I did it. I passed and became registered, and after that, I enjoyed what I was doing as well. Really changing lives, giving people advice on a life-changing decision that they were facing, and also solving complex problems. That's what immigration law is all about: looking at an issue and coming up with a strategy to see how you can best assist a person coming to you for advice. And sometimes there will be people that you can't assist, and you have to be upfront and tell them. But it's the type of job, and especially if you deal with immigration to Australia as I do, it's always dynamic. There's always something happening. Always keeps you on your toes. The field changes, new things happen, amendments, new policies, big shake-ups. Everything. There's always some drama. Even if you go away on holiday for a month and you never look at anything, you come back, you'll find, wow, there's so much to catch up on. It's that kind of job, and I definitely enjoy it. So I think I'll keep doing it.
Wow, good on you. That sounds really good. It sounds like especially somebody who loves to travel. I mean, being part of the migration, being a migration specialist, it kind of goes hand in hand, because you've got experience of what it's traveling interstate and seeing different cultures and things like that. So, getting back to helping people move or transition from one country to another, it just seems to me like natural. I don't know. It doesn't seem like a big, thing to me like that. It seems like that's what you're made for. So good on you. That's good that you found something that you love. I've got a quick question then to maybe start us off with questions. So we've had, people who are like economists on and things like that, and they've kind of jokingly made mention that they've had to unlearn everything they've learned because it's a completely different world. And then what we hear about, immigration and the benefits that the government, the government always spruiks the benefits of immigration and mass immigrations and things like that. What are the benefits of having a good, solid immigration policy into Australia?
Well, there are several elements to a successful migration policy, and what we need to realize first and foremost is Australia as a destination country, as a traditional destination country for skilled migrants, is competing with other traditional destination countries for the same pool of migrants, people with skills, people who are upwardly mobile, highly mobile, people who have skills that they can take to any country, and we're trying to attract those people. And we have, in addition to that, or parallel to that, we have some very serious skill shortages in Australia that have been around for decades, and that we haven't been able to resolve. And some of that is because of poor policies that have been followed. And I can give you an example from accountants, for instance. We've had over the last probably 10 to 15 years, thousands and thousands of accountants who have used those skills, some of whom were educated in Australia, some of whom had qualifications from overseas, to come to Australia as skilled migrants in that occupation. And somehow 10, 15 years down the track, Australian employers are still screaming out for properly qualified accountants. You've got to wonder, why has that skill shortage, that particular skill shortage, not been able to be addressed over the last 10 to 15 years, given that we've had so many accountants come through the door as skilled migrants? These people they're not fakes. They have real qualifications. Some of them have experience, some of them don't. And there are reasons why that hasn't happened. The structure of the points test, and the way for many years people who studied in Australia had certain advantages in the points test that they could benefit from, and many of those people came in with a view to really getting those qualifications and using those qualifications to get permanent residence without really intending to work in those fields.
Right.
So the whole attempt to address the skill shortage of accountants, and this is just one occupation, an obvious one that we could give as an example, where it hasn't worked. We have been more successful with some other occupations, especially trades. We bring in people who are qualified tradespeople, and by and large, they end up working as tradespeople going forward.
I think you've touched on the point, because I work in construction and I speak to a lot of different people. A lot of migrants come in. There'll be surveyors, or there'll be traffic controllers, or there'll be a number of different occupations. And I'll talk to them. I say, what did you do in your country? And they'll be like, I was a lawyer, I was an accountant, as you said. Do you think they're coming to Australia and they're going, well, it's tough for me to get a job as an accountant because, they might not be accepting me because I've just immigrated here, but I can make a hell of a lot more money in a trade or on a construction site that I ever would making the sort of money in accounting. Do you think they're gravitating to that sort of area outside of the industry that they've been in because of the money?
Look, I don't know how common that is with accountants. I know that those people who study an accounting degree in Australia and possibly work for a brief period of time in their field, or some of them don't at all, and end up getting a permanent visa. Many of them go on to start businesses in other fields. So many of them intend to start some sort of business, running their own business. It could be a cleaning business. It could be a business providing hospitality services. It could be a real estate agency or whatever it is. But many of them intend to do things like that, and they must have never really wanted to work as accountants in the first place. An accountant going and working in construction sites, I guess that would be, it could happen, but I think that's probably more the exception rather than the rule.
It's just an observation that I've had just in my time in the industry. But to I guess pick your brain on the whole immigration issue, I'm just going to bring up some statistics to put everything in perspective. So this is from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, and it says Australia's population grew by 2.2% to 26.5 million people in the 12 months to the 31st of March this year, according to data released today by the Australian Bureau of Statistics. So this was released in September this year. The ABS head of demography said 13 months after international borders reopened, net overseas migration accounted for 81% of growth and added 454,400 people to the population in the year to March 2023. Net overseas migration was driven by a large increase in arrivals, up 103% from last year to 681,000, and only a small increase in overseas migrant departures, up 8.8% to 226,600. This pattern, low departures in particular, is a catch-up effect after closed international borders as international students return, with only a small number departing because very few arrived during the pandemic. This effect is expected to be temporary, as the number of departures will increase in the future as temporary students start departing in usual numbers. Natural increase was 108,800 people, a decrease of 18.5% from last year. So people that are interested in excess deaths and birth rates, you might be interested in that figure. There were 301,200 births and 192,300 deaths registered during this time, with deaths increasing 7.9% and births decreasing 3.4%. COVID-19 mortality was still a contributor to an increased number of deaths. Now, with all that in mind, Anka, do you think that Australia's migration levels are adequate?
As it says in the media release, a lot of that effect is a catch-up effect of COVID and the pandemic. So what happened during that time was, of course, the borders were closed. There was massive restrictions on who could come in and who could not, and even Australian citizens and permanent residents were effectively denied access to their own countries, which was really, really sad. And I hope it's never ever repeated again in the future. But what it meant for immigration was that for the first time since the end of the Second World War, we had negative net overseas migration during that time, and now the figures are catching up. And what's meant by net overseas migration, because that always throws people, and people who are not necessarily working in this field might not know or have the wrong idea about what it means. So net overseas, you know, when you come into the country and you're given an arrival card, that arrival card asks, there's a question on that card. It says, do you intend to live in Australia for the next 12 months? Yes or no? And so if you say yes to that question, you're counted as a long-term arrival. It doesn't matter what visa you have, because of course Australian citizens and permanent residents are required to complete that arrival card, as well as temporary visa holders. So everyone completes the card, and whoever ticks yes to that question of intending to live in Australia for the next 12 months is counted as part of that net overseas migration, regardless of the visa they hold. So that net overseas migration, the bulk of it, and it's probably going to be north of 650,000 for this year, which is huge, but it will come down again. But a lot of it is probably 2/3 of it, and maybe more, will be international students coming back in numbers after universities and other TAFEs and providers opened themselves up to applications once again. So there's a lot of that happening. But are the numbers right? I would argue that our permanent residence targets have been pretty much at the same level for a long time. I know that during the last few years of the coalition government, they changed the interpretation of the planning levels and started talking about the planning levels as if they were a ceiling, as opposed to just a target, and they were they were effectively using that as a ceiling and reducing the number of people being granted permanent visas for the last couple of years or so of their 9-year government. But if you look at it on a longer term perspective, over a decade or the last 2 decades, they've been fairly consistent at between 150 to 190,000, and this government has retained them at the same level. I don't really see them putting them up any more than that. I think it is what you do with those numbers. Because those numbers, I think they come from all sorts of places, but you've got the Productivity Commission preparing reports for the government. They look at the fertility replacement rate. They look at what number of what population growth we have to have in order to sustain an aging population, in order to have people entering into the workforce and paying taxes, so that we can have people retiring on pensions in due course, and with an aging population that is more important than ever before. So they look at things like that, and the Treasury prepares what they call the intergenerational report. They take a more longer term perspective, and they look at the next 40, 50 years and what Australia may look like. Some of it is obviously projection and may or may not come to pass, but they look at things like birth rates and migration levels and how to manage that. So then they come up with certain recommendations in those reports. Those reports come out every year. So I think the question is not so much are the levels adequate. It's more I think how do we allocate those numbers, and how do we allocate those numbers in a way that benefits Australia the most, and that actually addresses the needs that we have, as opposed to just ticking some box and saying, yeah, we delivered X number of visas this year.
Well, that's right. That's interesting too, because that's, if you said before when you first were talking about it that we're competing in a pool for best countries of migrants to go to. Okay, so I presume America would be one of those, and things like that. So are we incentivizing the right kind of people, or do we have enough incentive for the right kind of immigrant to come to Australia that we need. Like we do need, I understand that we need skills filled instantly. So we know skill shortages. Let's talk about like the accountants. Okay, so skill shortages in accounting. So we need accountants. Okay, so we can bring accountants over. But how are we targeting those people, and are our infrastructures enough to keep large numbers? Like we had 400,000 people projected to come in, or 450,000 people this year alone. We have obviously this going a little bit into political as well. So we have roughly, the last figure I heard was about 1 million houses shy of to house the people of Australia that are here already. We're bringing over another 400,000, estimated 750,000 or 715,000 in the next within the next 2 years, including 2023. So by end of 2024, 715,000. Is Australia capable to house that many people as we speak today?
There is definitely a disconnect between our migration targets and the way our housing policies run, and at a time like this now, especially with that bounce back effect we talked about just before, in the post-COVID era, we're seeing that our infrastructure is struggling to cope. And that's not surprising because, let's face it, even if we had zero migration or zero net overseas migration, and we had negative net overseas migration during COVID, let's not forget that. So even if we had zero, forget negative, let's say we had zero, we still would have the housing issue that we're facing right now. So that wouldn't go away just because the numbers have dropped. And we saw that it didn't go away during COVID. When the borders were effectively closed. So, and successive governments have really not taken that up as a major issue facing our country. And I think that's where the gap has been. They have been consistent in maintaining the migration levels as they have been for the last decade or two. And they have, reiterated why we have to keep doing things that way because of the shortages and the need to replace our aging workforce and things like that. And everyone gets that to a point, but where they have really dropped the ball is building sufficient infrastructure, and not just but housing being the most important of that. To ensure that everyone's got a roof on over their heads, and no one's struggling to find housing.
Well, this is something I really want to get into, planning, because we recently had Rod Roberts, who's a member of the New South Wales Upper House. He made a speech in the New South Wales Parliament where he said it's not a issue of immigration; it's just a simple issue of migration. So it doesn't matter if you're bringing in 100,000 people from China or 100,000 people from Queensland, you're still going to be facing the same issues. So there needs to be planning. And one of the figures from this Australian Bureau of Statistics article here that really surprised me, it says the largest increase in total population was Victoria with 161,700 people, slightly more than New South Wales with 156,300 people. So that would suggest to me that a lot of people are flocking, as they probably normally do, to Sydney and Melbourne, our two biggest cities. But there seems to be no plan by government to decentralize our populations. And I want to get into that a little bit more with you later. But do you think that there's adequate planning for decentralizing? Like, is there any incentive for immigrants to live outside of Sydney and Melbourne?
You would think. Look, I have a lot of colleagues who deal or who themselves are based in regional areas and deal a lot with regional employers looking for people skilled people to work for them, and that they are prepared to sponsor towards perhaps initially for a temporary visa and maybe eventually for a permanent visa. So this idea that there's no life in the regions, I think, is perhaps not all that accurate. The question has always been, how do you attract people how do you incentivize people to go to the regions where those needs exist? Somebody was saying to me, as I said, I have colleagues who live, not out in the middle of the desert. We're talking about regional Victoria, maybe a couple of hours, 3-4 hours outside Melbourne. And they are saying to me, good luck if you have something break in your house and you need a plumber to come and have a look. You might be waiting a couple of weeks before you could get anyone out. I mean, that's the kind of, so imagine many of those centers how much they would benefit from people who are able to be self-employed in some of those trades, and particularly in trades, because that's where a lot of the shortages are in the regions that we know. You might not need a lot of sales and marketing manager or high-level corporate executives in the regions, not ordinarily anyway. But you're always going to need carpenters. You're always going to need construction project managers. You're always going to need even nurses, and teachers. You're going to need plumbers and electricians, those people who we rely on to keep the place going. And there's, the previous government back in 2019, they introduced a couple of regional visas, a new regional visas, subclasses 491 and 494. And especially the 494 was meant to be, it was presented at the time as something of a silver bullet to fix this issue of attracting people to the regions. And so this happened in November 19. And of course, COVID came along only a few months after. And that whole visa collapsed. They were because it was meant to be a provisional visa. The government basically sat on those applications from overseas, and there was very little demand from onshore and from offshore. They were sitting on those applications. Some of them took more than two and a half years to be processed. And the idea was, when it was introduced, they said they were going to give it top priority. It was going to be the number one priority visa, the quickest to be processed. And nothing like that happened, of course. And the visa probably died a very slow death. At the moment, there's still no take up, and with some changes that the government has mooted might be coming up later this year, that they might just be getting ready to bury that visa forever. So what that means is they need to come up with a new strategy to incentivize people to go to the regions. Because those, what they need to do is, I think they need to work closer with state governments and the agencies that approve sponsorships for state governments to sponsor people into those regional areas. Many of them are on the ground themselves, and they know quite well what those different regions within their states and territories need in terms of skills, and they need to be given the tools to really get the right people into areas where their skills are going to be needed. Because let's face it, say if you're a plumber and you know that you can go to a regional town where you could establish yourself and start earning very good income from day one, why wouldn't you do it? Right? And the same for any trade or any other occupation where your skills are in demand. Why would you compete with many others in an already crowded area when you could have your pick of the lot in a region where you could probably live in a nicer house and start hit the ground running from day one? Why wouldn't you do it? And that's what needs to be incentivized. So I don't know if the government is going to come up with a renewed strategy for the regions. We'll have to wait and see.
Go, Stephen.
There's a big idea out there. It's called the Big Australia, and I think it was Kevin Rudd was saying that we need to increase our population to 50 million people. Now, I work in construction. The whole purpose in construction is either you're increasing the effectiveness of a piece of infrastructure, or you're increasing its capacity. So when I hear 50 million people for Australia, I say, okay, but what's the plan for it? We could get there, but let's plan for it. What are the planning stages that we need to implement to be able to increase our population to that extent? And I know there's a lot of people out there that disagree with that. I mean, my first foray into politics, I went to a meeting in my local area here, and one guy that I was speaking to was he brought up that the happiest countries in the world have populations of 14 million people, and he listed a whole bunch of small European countries. And I turned around to him and I said, you do realize Australia is a big place, right? And he didn't really have an answer for me, but he called me later in the week and he said, if we really want to be happy and successful here in Australia, we need to reduce our population to 18 million. And I was like, we've got a population of about 25 million now. How are we going to get rid of 7 million people? And look, he made some horrible joke about sending people to the Russian war, and I'm like, okay, I cut that guy out. I didn't want any more to do with him. But for me, if we're going to plan to increase our population, there's 4 main areas that we need to look at, and one is housing, as we've mentioned, because the housing affordability at the moment is way off the chart, and people are really struggling. The other issue is you're talking about people living in rural communities. Well, we need to start looking at big nation-building projects like a high-speed rail. And I've heard that people could live in places like Goulburn and catch a high-speed rail to Sydney in, say, 25 minutes. Now, that would completely revolutionize Australia. I mean, people could now buy a home or maybe an apartment in Goulburn and easily work in Sydney, and that would solve a lot of issues there. The other issue is water. We need to drought-proof a lot of Australia so it's more habitable for us to build little towns and cities there. And the last one's energy. We need to have energy security here, and that's a huge another element. But Anka, I'm gonna give you the opportunity now. If you were to be on a parliamentary committee to advise the government on this issue, how do we plan to increase Australia's population? I want to ask you a couple of questions. Firstly, is the 50 million population figure achievable? Second one, is there a time frame that we could achieve that within? And the last question is, how would you strategize the planning to be able to achieve that?
Is it achievable? You would have to look at the time frame that you're putting on it to see if it's achievable. I don't think it's achievable in the short term, but are we going in that direction of of a bigger Australia of 50 million people? Yes, eventually, yes, we are. We will have to go in that direction, but we're talking maybe in the next 40 to 50 years. We're not talking in the next decade or so. We've never had a population increase of that sort in such a short period of time. So it will take a long time. But I think in the meantime, yes, what you said about those key priority areas. See, you can make changes to the migration program. As I said, in terms of the program, in terms of the numbers in the program, they've been pretty much very consistent over the last couple of decades anyway. And it doesn't look like this government intends to change those numbers significantly. So it really is a question of what you do and how you allocate those numbers and what you do with them. That's really the key. And then the other issues that you've highlighted, so construction and water and energy and transportation, those things then come into play. And what we need is really a discussion that is a more holistic discussion that takes into consideration those challenges and links them to not necessarily to migration as such, but to population growth and how those challenges are to be met going forward. Until now, governments have really had a more of a short-term focus on putting a band-aid here, a band-aid there, and hoping that that'll pull the wool over people's eyes and make them, make it look like they're doing something about it, but really lacking that longer term focus and dedication and planning to address them in the long term.
Well, do you think it might be better or part of the plan? I understand that we need to you can't just grow, or you just can't get specific skills from kids coming straight out of school. Trade courses are 3 to 4 years and, all that kind of stuff. And then you have to have on the ground experience. A tradesman, just like I'm a tradesman, you don't get your full skill set until after a couple of years of graduating or becoming a tradesman anyway. So you're still green around the gills. And then what happens is after you get into the field and deal with all the issues, you build up your tool bag and all your fixes and stuff like that. And then you become a pretty good tradesman if you care about your job. Okay. But do you think that, so I understand that we do need an immigration policy to bring in the shortage of skills for now. But part of this, what ties into the planning idea and stuff that you're saying is, what about the Australian kids? What about the Australian kids coming out of school? Why aren't we incentivizing? Not everyone's an accountant. Not everyone's a doctor or a nurse or a lawyer. Okay, why is the government not really incentivizing our youth, the kids that don't want to be in school, that want to leave in year 10, that want to just get out, get into trade? I mean, you can have trade. You can have you can leave school in year 10. Like this would happen to me. I left school in year 10. I was a tradesman earning a tradesman's wage by the time I was 19, and working and being really useful to the society. Well, I hope I was useful to the society as far as, with the trade that I was doing. Okay. So, people wanted signs. I could make signs. I could help promote businesses, all that kind of stuff. Transferred my skills to other things in the construction industry as well now. Okay. So don't you think that, or do you think that, incentivizing Australian students and giving them all the opportunities that Australia has to offer should be a priority, aside from filling the skill gap now? So we really need let's say all the kids that go out of school now, 20% of them want to leave in year 10. That's a 20% of the kids graduating all schools to go into trade and become good. It takes 4 years. So we need to cover the skills gap for 4 years, 5, maybe 6 years. And then move on to educating our students and our children, and incentivizing people to have maybe more children, not less.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's all part of the package of having a longer term focus. And as you've rightly said, if you look at some of those trades, it takes 3-4 years to get to a point where you have a piece of paper to say that you're qualified, and then it takes maybe a couple more years on top of that before you're actually fully proficient and able to do the job. And the same is true for professional roles. I know that, for example, there's a shortage of nurses. We all know that there's a shortage of nurses, and it's not just in Australia, it's worldwide, and everyone's competing for the same pool of nurses. I think in Victoria, the government made put in an incentive whereby you could get a refund on the fees that you paid if you did a nursing qualification, as long as you undertook to work for in the public service for X number of years after completing your qualifications. The take up wasn't huge, and also remember that the industry lost a lot of nurses during COVID, not just because of burnout, but also because of the mandates that they pushed later onto those professionals. So very sad at a time when we were struggling to attract nurses from elsewhere. We were losing our own ones.
We asked them
to either other countries or to other industries. Either way, it's a terrible state of affairs. But yeah, it takes a long time, and that's to educate people and to get them in. Incentives for tradies, incentives for certain key qualifications or professions that require professional degrees definitely has to be part of the longer term planning, and we need to get to a point where we rely on those systems that are in place and that are well oiled and functioning properly to deliver us those skills over a longer period of time, and to ensure that they remain affordable or attractive enough that kids would take them on, and when they come out of it at the end, that they hopefully stay in those fields and do and work in those areas that we need them to work in, so those gaps can be filled into the future.
My wife is German, so she immigrated to Australia, and now she's a permanent resident, and obviously married to me, and having kids and everything. But she speaks of when she did the English test it was very difficult. And I know a lot of her friends are in the same boat. They're finding it very difficult just to pass the English test. And I find with a lot of people that immigrate to Australia or in the process of trying to attain a visa, they get incredibly frustrated with the process, and there's a little bit of contempt that's inbred because of that process. Do you find that with the people that you deal with? And if it is such a hard process, do you think that there's any solutions to make it better?
When it comes to the English test, I don't think it's a bad thing to have an English test. It's one of those basic requirements, and really the higher levels of competency that's required to get points is mostly for visas that operate on a points-based system, because if you're being sponsored by an employer, the entry level for English is actually pretty low. It's you only have to have what they call competent English, and that's not a very high level. And if you haven't even got that level, you probably have no business being here in the first place.
We would fail, Adam, unfortunately.
with a basic competency on English.
Look, I deal a lot with native speakers, and just because a person is a native speaker, that is no guarantee that they'll get those really high marks in English testing, because the test, I guess, the test tests certain competencies, and people who don't necessarily use the written word in their daily lives don't always have those skills, or not to the same level. But I think the English test, the frustration with the English test, a lot of it comes from not so much the level that they're asking you to attain, but the way the test has been deployed in the past. And a lot of my colleagues in the profession have brought this up in the past, and rightly so. And there hasn't been much progress with it from the government side. The way these tests are structured, they've got different components: reading, writing, speaking, and listening. And then there's an overall score that you get, which is most of the time an average of the other four components. And the way the points test is structured, and the way the basic requirements for even employer-sponsored visas work, is that you must get a specific score in each of the four components, and your overall score isn't even looked at for the majority of visas. There are some where they do look at them, but for the majority of the visas, the overall score isn't looked at. But because in order to have a holistic approach to language competency, the overall score should and does mean something. And if that was taken into consideration, I think that would take away some of that frustration, because especially when the English testing was a monopoly under the IELTS, IELTS was the only test that was accepted for many years, up until 6 or 7 years ago. And a lot of people had this feeling that it was a money-making scheme, that people were almost on purpose being failed one or the other components just so they could come back and pay again and be tested again. And then you fail some other component, you come back again. The opening up of the English language testing field to other competitors like PT Academic and TOEFL and Cambridge English Advanced got rid of some of those concerns, because IELTS lost its primacy and its monopoly over the market. But some of those concerns relating to having to get a certain score in each of the four bands still remains. I think that's the frustration that you've heard from your wife and possibly her friends who have gone through the system. But that's easily fixed, and that easy fix doesn't actually break the system. So that's just something that the government could fix tomorrow if they wanted to. But for some reason, there's been a bit of reluctance. Who knows why?
I think people on the ground are a bit worried about the whole migration numbers and things like that, because let's say we're so in need of nurses. My wife's a nurse, and I've seen both sides of the story there. And my wife's also migrated to Australia as well, because my wife's actually South African. So, which is also a very high demographic of migrants into Australia. I think I saw a stat researching this was about 75% of migrants come to Australia are South African anyway, or something like out of the group, or something like that. It was a crazy number. Anyway, like my concern, and I think, and I've spoken to a lot of people about this, you know, through the political careers and stuff like that, you know. So we're so desperate for a nurse, so we'll bring a nurse over, okay, and we incentivize them to come. So we give them, you know, the government, well, the taxpayer supports them via, you know, rental assistance. They get priority over, you know, for when they have to do their practical tests, and they get to choose the hospital that they want to go to. And it kind of disadvantages Australian students or citizen students, you know, where they have to then maybe go to further away hospitals to do their practical testing and stuff like that. Okay, but a big concern is that you know, we'll bring over a South African nurse, and she has 2 kids. So then we bring the 2 kids, obviously have to come over, and then the husband will come over, and then maybe a grandparent might come over with them. So to get one nurse, we've got to bring 4 or 5 people over. And it might not necessarily contribute to our economy as we would hope, because you would have one nurse who is working as a nurse, finally fills the gap, gets her 1 year, does her 1 year bridge course so she can actually practice in Australia. And then what happens is, you know, but we've got basically 4 other people that we're supporting, or that could potentially go on to like the benefits. Is that an issue, or are you seeing any sort of issues like that with our immigration, the way we're trying to attract and bring people over to benefit Australia?
Not so much with skilled migrants. Typically, skilled migrants tend to have skilled partners, or at the very least, partners who are highly employable. So even if they might not necessarily be in a skilled occupation, they have experience that allows them to get employed fairly easily in Australia. And when it comes to, I mean, kids are, of course, you know, they're the future anyway. So you bring them in, and eventually they become good little Aussies, and they become professionals or tradies or something themselves going forward, and they replace that aging population. So that's something that we need anyway. As for grandparents, well, the migration of grandparents is severely restricted into Australia anyway. So the processing times for parents of Australian citizens and permanent residents to come into Australia are at the moment, you're looking at, you know, 7 or 8 years, just even if you're prepared to pay the contributory the contribution fee that you have to pay per adult, and even those ones are taking about 8 years. And the ones where you're not paying that contribution fee, it's more like 30 years. So, you know, it's not easy at all, and you certainly cannot bring them as part of your family unit. That door was shut many years ago. Back in 2015, they closed that door, and you were only able to do that with a widowed parent anyway, and they basically made that impossible to starting from 2015. So that's gone. But yeah, it's what I see in my practice, and I think that many of my colleagues would agree as well. Generally speaking, skilled people tend to have skilled partners, or at least, or at the very least, partners who are working in fields where they are easily employable in Australia. And plus, let's remember that in the points test, if you have a skilled partner who's somebody who's able to get a skills assessment of their own in a skilled occupation, that actually gives you points, and those points were increased some years ago to make it easier for people with skilled partners to come in under that system. So that's worked more or less quite well. But even without that, as I said, generally speaking, you know, couples tend to sort of come as a unit, and they both end up being employed gainfully in Australia.
Oh, that's good to hear, at least, anyway. So people who are worried about that can just rest assured a little bit that we've got some numbers and statistics here that are positive for Australia, which is a good thing, because I mean, Australians are just worried. I think, you know, they're worried about where they're, you know, bringing people over and then having children. Their children, how are their children going to get jobs, and things like that, you know. So I'm glad that anyway that's kind of eased my mind a little bit as well.
No, that as I said, you know, we do need those kids to replace our aging population anyway. So you know, it's good. And also, interestingly enough, statistics show that migrants tend to have a lower fertility rate compared to the general population. So that's quite interesting, actually. You know, a lot of people, I think, particularly people who are anti-immigration might actually think that it's the opposite, that you're suddenly going to have all these people coming in and having kids in Australia and so on and so forth. But actually the opposite is true. Statistics show that that migrants, and there could be all sorts of reasons for that. People delay having kids because of making those big decisions to make a move, and of course when you change countries, you spent a lot of your savings on the move itself, and possibly you find yourself in a situation where you can't necessarily afford another child, whereas if you had stayed back where you were, maybe you could have. And so there could be all sorts of reasons for it, and I don't pretend to know the full reasoning for it, but that's what figures show anyway. So yeah, anyone who's coming in, and especially and the younger the kids, the better, of course, because the younger, again, we have evidence that shows that the earlier kids coming into Australia get into the school system and do from middle school onwards, the more likely they are to be successful going forward, and integrating, as well as getting an education that will allow them to function on their own in Australia.
Well, I've just put the link in the chat if anyone wants to call in and ask Anka a question. Tony's even put a comment in here saying that she's listening to us from the bath, which is interesting. So people are listening to us from everywhere, but
as long as she's got a glass of champagne while she's in the bath, then that's okay.
I think, judging by some of her comments, maybe she does. But Anka, Adam raised, what some Australian people are worried about when it comes to immigration. I think another issue is assimilation, and some areas, especially in Sydney, you'll get a congregation of certain cultures and certain races together. And I think it's quite evident that over time, assimilation does happen, and countries that have immigrated here maybe earlier around the Second World War, they've already integrated fine, and they're part of Australian culture, whereas for countries that are immigrating now are having maybe some issues. What do you think the government can do to assist this assimilation process, where you don't get such a congregation of different cultures?
I think it's a question of spreading out the population, so that you've got incentives to to settle in different parts of the country. And I think that's where, if we go back to that conversation that we had about the regional migration policy, that's where that's sort of focus of attracting people to different parts of the country would come in handy. I think compared to many other countries, particularly in Europe, who have those sorts of issues with people from certain areas congregating in certain neighborhoods, and forming what you could call ghettos and things like that. We haven't really had that so much in Australia. Yes, there are in Sydney and Melbourne, I guess there are certain suburbs that have maybe a concentration of certain groups more than others, and things like that, but not to the exclusion of everyone else. There's really no suburb that I can think of that is primarily one particular group. You could have more visibility of certain groups, but that's about it. So we haven't done too badly on that front, but I think it's it really needs to be part of an overall population strategy anyway, to spread that. If we're going to be a bigger country, we can't just be a bigger country by being by making Melbourne and Sydney and Perth and Brisbane bigger. We need to spread that out and have new centers of gravity, and new centers where people will be attracted to, and grow those areas going forward.
Well, I can tell you that there is definitely a disconnect in that particular stance of planning, because the New South Wales state government is pushing all the local councils to densify the city areas that they have with apartment buildings and things like that. So they're not actually. It's really hard, and what I've been seeing is, there's all this hoo-ha about, and right in some cases rightly so, whatever, with green policy and animals and native species and stuff like that. I'm not saying kill them all and just build houses out in the bush and stuff like that. But you know, Australia's the land mass of Australia is the size of America, roughly. And America has 330 million people. We've only got 26.5 million people. So we've got room. We've got all the room we need to actually open up Australia and expand our cities and actually grow our cities out to regional areas. You talked about drought mitigation and things like that. Well, if you slowly start expanding cities outward, you know, you get plumbing, you start getting water, you start doing this. You don't have to build such big infrastructure because you can just maybe bulk up or intensify the infrastructure that we have. But there's a disconnect with sending people and incentivizing people out into rural areas, really, because all they're trying to do is densify our small cities. And there was a comment before about 15-minute cities and all that kind of stuff. And we've already had a taste of lockdowns with COVID and things like that. You know, so a lot of people are weary about, you know, these 15-minute cities and densification. And really what we really do need is expansification, if I can coin that term.
Yeah,
Decentralization. There you go.
I fully sympathize with some of those concerns, and they're quite valid concerns. But I can't see why they can't go. The two things cannot go hand in hand, because if you've got urban areas that are struggling to cope with transportation demands, one of the things that you know you could do is create a situation where fewer people have to move around, so that the transport systems are able to cope until such time as they are they're brought up to speed and into, you know, where the capacity is increased to deal with that increase in the population. And one way of doing that is, and this is what they've done in many countries in Asia, for instance, is along transport routes and especially around train stations, having that higher density sort of living closer to those transport hubs, so that people don't necessarily have to move big distances to get to where they need to get to. So you know, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. But if that's the only strategy that you have, and you haven't got that longer term perspective to build into the regions and to build up the regions so that they become centers of attraction in their own right, well then you're failing, because that's just focusing on addressing the existing problems within the big cities themselves isn't going to help you in the long term.
I completely agree.
You had me scared for a moment there.
No, but I completely agree. I
thought he was promoting 15-minute cities, but then he clarified.
No. I've seen some of his other interviews, and I've seen some of the other interviews and stuff like that. I know you're not for that, but what I was going to say is, but my concern, I guess, when in talking about that is, okay, fine, you know, let's put, you know, out in my area is it used to be rural. I guess it's kind of developed into a small city now. I think it was the biggest satellite city of Sydney for a while. And I don't know if that's changed now, if Bankstown's got that or something like that. But all right, so the government's going to, you know, put 6-story sky rises, 8-story sky rises into our semi-rural community, densify city areas, the city areas around the train tracks and stuff like that. My question is, they can't even put disabled lifts at Macquarie Fields train station. How are they going to invest in infrastructure to make sure that we're only not relying on densification? There's no trust in the government. I don't trust, I guess I don't trust, and a lot of my supporters and followers don't trust what they're trying to do, because it is what you were saying. It's a short-term fix. It's like, it's a Band-Aid fix. Let's just pump up the cities. Let's pump up next to the train stations. And there's nowhere for cars. There's nowhere for really anything. Okay, but you know what? You can work from home, or you can jump on the train, 5-minute walk to the train station, and go to the city if you need to, right? But they won't even put lifts in at a Macquarie Fields train station, which is the only lift in our area. Train station in our area that doesn't even have disabled lifts. So it's very hard to think that the government are going to plan far enough ahead to build more infrastructure to to mitigate that 15-meter city issue?
No, I share those same concerns. I mean, we need to see better governance for sure, and not just at the federal level, but at the state level and the local level as well. And that's we really we haven't been well served by the choices that are out there for some time now.
Absolutely. And sorry, Stephen, one more thing, and this is why he loves it when I'm sick or not able to do it, because I don't talk, but I'm going to talk over you today because I missed one.
It was so good yesterday.
It was so good yesterday. But now, see, just talking about that, I missed my. Oh, that's right. So what happens is, local councils are held to ransom by state government. So I just found this out. So I thought, I understand that your state kind of runs council, and that's that's the baby brother of state politics. But if a council rebuts or refuses to do what state government wants to implement, they get their funding cut. So they're hamstrung anyway. So they don't even have, that's the local council is the ground roots of getting from a local taxpayer, ratepayer, to a political group that can get it further up the line to state and then federal. Okay. And what happens is, if they say, hey, we don't want to build, we don't want to approve 6 or 7-story or 8-story buildings in our city, well, then they'll get marked and a black mark against them, and then they'll get no funding for however many years until the punishment is served the crime. I mean, that's pretty bad. I think that's bad and poor governance, because they're not listening to the people anyway.
That's right. And then you've got some councils doing anything but council business, trying to promote this cause or that cause, and engaging in areas that they haven't been elected to work on. So you've got to wonder what some of these people are thinking. If they thought that those are the causes that they're going to stand up for, maybe they should have gone to state government or federal government as opposed to local. So who knows what they were thinking.
Yep.
Well, speaking of governments, you're not only an immigration specialist, but you're also a political commentator, and you were speaking widely about the recent voice referendum. Now, we all know the result now, and it's been discussed the reasons why the no case won and why the yes case lost. But what do you see going forward? Where do you think the government's going to go after this? I know Tony put a comment in the chat very early on. I haven't been able to see the article, but she said that the misinformation bill has been delayed for now. So that's good news. We need to find out more information about that. But where do you see the whole political landscape going at the moment, especially with Albanese's government, maybe even Albanese's leadership himself?
I mean, the misinformation debate that seemed to start around the time of the referendum and continued on afterwards was, I think, a bit of a misnomer, in that some people were so keen to come up with reasons, particularly in the yes camp, to come up with reasons why they may not necessarily have got the result that they were looking for, that they were latching on to supposed misinformation by this or that group as being the primary cause of the outcome. But actually, if those surveys that were floating around earlier this year and late last year were correct, then the Yes campaign started off in a stronger position and gradually lost the support that they supposedly had. So they must have done something wrong. I don't think it's necessarily the other side that put forward a better argument as such, because it was always for the yes to lose as opposed to the other way. And it just seems to be that they weren't able to convince a sufficient number of Australians of the need to, not necessarily the need to put in place a body like The Voice, but the need, I think, to instate it or to enshrine it in the Constitution from day one. I think that's where the argument came unstuck, and I've written about this extensively. That it's almost like there was no trust in the body that was being proposed in the first place. There was a reluctance to look. Let's put it in place and see how it goes. No, we can't do that because that's not what the Aboriginal people have asked for. So it became a bit of a circular argument. We can't put it in place because the Aboriginal people have asked us, to put it into the Constitution, and we can't put it. We need to put it into the Constitution because that's what the Aboriginal people asked us to do. And so it became a bit of a circular argument that just didn't win any new supporters. And in fact, the figures seem to suggest that people who were on the fence from the start or towards the middle of the campaign were more likely to cross over into the no side than otherwise. So what they did was they ended up consolidating perhaps the people who were always going to vote yes for different reasons, and some did out of conviction, and some did out of a sense of loyalty to their tribe or to their people and things like that. But they failed at convincing people who were having second thoughts or who weren't convinced by the arguments that were out there. As for what the government is going to do going forward, well, if they are serious about wanting to close the gap, and if they're serious about wanting to do something for the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians that will make their lot better, they've got to show us what that plan is. Because I think what we were seeing throughout the campaign was that the government had all of their eggs in the one basket, and that basket was called The Voice, and it was going to be the silver bullet, once it was in place, everything was going to be good, and they could turn around and say, we did this, we put this in place, and look, and they were going to effectively buy themselves a few years, by the time they did the consultations to figure out the composition of the voice, and it was finally put in place, and for it to run for a year or two before we know, if it's working or not. So they were going to effectively buy themselves 2 or 3 years to say, look, just give us some time. We're doing something about it. Now they haven't got that, so there's more of an immediacy for them to have to do something to show that they were serious all along about wanting to make things better and really close the gap. And unfortunately, they have put themselves in a situation where legislating for the voice now is not really politically feasible or doable. And that's really, really sad, because that's an opportunity I think that could have been captured very early on in the piece. And I never understood why they would say something like, oh, but if we don't put it into the Constitution, the next government will come and just get rid of it, or some other evil people will come and take it away from us, and things like that. I mean, you're a government. When this debate first started, the government had only been in place for 6 months. You're elected for a minimum of 3 years. With any kind of luck, it'll be another term as well. So that's 6 years. So you've got maybe 2.5 years as a bare minimum, but more likely to be 5.5 years to go. And you're thinking that somebody else will come and steal it from you. Well, you had all the time in the world to legislate then, let it run, for the people to see that it's working, it's delivering as projected, and making a real difference, a positive difference. And then possibly, if it is part of your platform, which it was, if it's part of your platform, then go to the Australian people to ask them to enshrine it in the Constitution down the track. And it could have even been combined with the next federal election, thereby cutting that cost of $300 million just to run the referendum. I mean, quite a lot of that is common sense, but it seems common sense is not that common at all.
There's no common sense in politics. I've been told that many times by many different people. That was crazy. I forgot what I was gonna ask something, and now I've forgotten what I was.
That's right. I just want to ask Tony. You sent this article about the misinformation bill. I can't find that anywhere. I've just had a quick look. If you can send me the article in my Facebook, just so we can have some evidence that what you said was correct, because I can't find any evidence that the misinformation bill has been delayed. I hope it has, because a lot of people have been concerned about that. But I better just make that clarification. If you can show me some evidence, it would be good. I can't open it up here, but yeah.
Stephen, it came back to me. So I've got the question. So that Labor, were obviously 4 years in. I can't remember now the numbers exactly, but they were in opposition for a long time. If this was going to be if this was going to be their golden ticket to glory and all that kind of stuff, would they not have had a plan or some sort of structure of what the voice was going to be anyway? Don't you think that they could have, as you said, with the whole legislating it in, they should have had, like, I agree with your sentiment there about having it legislated in, getting it to run and work for a couple of years, work out some of the kinks and show the people of Australia and show the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders that this is going to make a difference and this isn't going to be like all the other bogus schemes that didn't work and made certain individuals rich and have pilots for 24/7 on hand and boats in farms out in the middle of whoop whoop. Don't you think why did not, if Labor was going to use this as their master stroke, why didn't they have anything sort of drafted or written up and set up how it would work? I think this is the biggest failure of the referendum as well, is that they just had no idea what the hell was going on. Not to mention had communists really pushing the agenda as well. You walk away from those guys.
Oh, there was a mixed bag on both sides, I think, and those sorts of the more extreme views, I don't think helped either side. But really, the loss was the Yes campaign's doing. So it's not that the No campaign won anything as such. The Yes campaign lost whatever goodwill they initially had to begin with. And as for having a plan, well, yeah, either they never had a plan, or they were not sharing it with us, or they were relying on the blueprint that was put out in the Calmer-Langton report to form the basis of, because that Calmer-Langton report foresaw a national voice as well as local and regional voices. So when people were being asked to vote on a voice, they weren't just voting on a single voice. It was the national voice that was going to be in the constitution had the referendum passed. But we would, as a bonus, we would be getting in the Calmer-Langton report, it said 35 local and regional voices to go along with that they would be advising. They would be providing advice at that level, then up to the local, and then finally up to the national voice. Wasn't all that clear how that coordination was going to work and how that potential conflicts would be ironed out and things like that. And that's precisely why, for the Australian people to see how it would work first before being asked to go to that quite definitive stage of putting it into the constitution and knowing how difficult it is to change our constitution, to make any sort of change to our constitution, for a country like us where it is so hard to make that change, to be asked to do that first, it's like putting the cart before the horse, and I think that ultimately just didn't convince people.
No, I definitely agree with you, and I 100% agree. I think Stephen's got the link now.
It's a Telegram link, so I can't open up Telegram links on my computer. I haven't got that set up, Tony, so unfortunately. But she's got a link to Joel Jamal, so if you want to check out Joel Jamal's Telegram link, he might have something on there in relation to the misinformation bill. But we've seen the polls come out and say that Labor has slipped in the polls now. Do you think Albanese will see a leadership challenge in the next few weeks and months?
Well, I think it's more difficult now for that leadership change to happen. So it's not like the Rudd Gillard years where you could just stage a putsch in the party room to get rid of a leader. So it's a bit more complicated than that now to change leadership. But look, I think that ultimately comes down to, and that's true for any leader. If it gets to a stage where the party elders and the party, sort of broadly speaking, the party machination decides that the leader is more of a liability than an asset, then that's when that push happens. So you don't even need the push for that. So I don't think we're anywhere near that yet. Yes, there's been a bit of a I think with particularly with the cost of living challenges that many Australians are facing, there's been a little bit of a turn away from government. But we're still 2 years out from elections, so it's a long time to go before this starts sort of worrying people in terms of within the party. And so I think early on, I don't expect any challenge anytime soon. But if things start slipping and going badly in the polls and in the overall public opinion, that could come up eventually.
Okay, Anka. Thank you very much for coming on tonight. We've enjoyed having you here, and knowing that you are a political commentator, we might have you back on in the future, hopefully, to discuss some other issues outside of immigration and different things, because I think you do have a very balanced and reasonable perspective on things. But the final segment,
and he's got a great beard,
and well, yeah,
that could be a positive or a negative depending on who's watching.
Positive for me.
I feel like the drummer in ZZ Top tonight.
No beard at all.
But the final segment of the ex-candidates is something that we call Build Your Own Fantasy Government. Now, the idea of this segment is that you are in control of the next Parliament of Australia, and you can choose 5 to 6 experts, politicians, former politicians, whoever it may be, maybe your neighbour or a friend, or people are even choosing dead people lately. You can choose 5 or 6 people to head up the next government of Australia. Who would you choose?
Look, I think a question like that, I probably would be focusing on skills and contributions rather than personalities so much. I think a big issue that we have had with parliaments in the past, and I was having this conversation with someone not long ago, and I said, the Labor Party was out of federal government for 9 years, right? So they lost government in 2013, re-elected in 2022. And as soon as they got back in power, some of the people who were ministers in their last government back in, between 2007 and 2013 became ministers again. The Attorney General was the same. Penny Wong was in government back then, and many others. Bill Shorten was still there. Even Albanese himself was there. So it's basically the same parties alternating in power. And what I call the 2.5 party cartel in my writings. The 2.5 party cartel alternating in power as if they're anointed by some higher power to rule Australia in perpetuity. I think that's what we need to break out of, and we need to focus on. I mean, during the pandemic, we saw how governments, just didn't take advice from a broad range of experts and focused on getting or choosing to get advice from people who were just going to minister them and just accept the party line as a given. So if I was ever in a position of responsibility, I would be surrounding myself with people with a broad range of skills and with real life skills. I certainly would not be looking to select my team from people who have been lifelong politicians. I'd be looking at people with real life experience who can actually contribute and make a difference.
All right. That sounds good. But we've got no names out of it. We've got no names out of you. We've got skill sets instead. So you want people?
Because I don't want to randomly select names. Rather I would be selecting on the basis of on skills and experience, but real life experience, not just someone who's always ever been a politician since leaving school.
Well, maybe
I agree with that.
Your advice. Sorry, Stephen, go for it.
No, I was just saying I agree with that completely. I think you've made a very good point. Even I think there does need to be some real world experience in there, not just have people that have been part of maybe a young Labor or Liberal movement or part of the union movement. As we know, there's a lot of lawyers in there as well. It's only one specialized group of people in there, and you do need a broad range of, as you said, skills in different areas. So No, I agree with that completely. So thank you very much. If people want to follow your writings, how can they follow you?
I'm most active on LinkedIn. I write pretty much every day on various different political issues. So if they want to follow me there, that's the best place to get up to date information on what I'm writing about, what I'm talking about, what I'm thinking about.
Awesome. Well, look, thank you very much for coming on the show. We've really enjoyed it. As I said, we'd love to have you back on some point in the future. I hope you've enjoyed it as well. I've put the link in the description if anyone wants to jump on to buy me a coffee and show you support for what Adam and I are doing. We'd much appreciate it. But for everyone watching tonight, if you've enjoyed this, please share it far and wide. It does make a big difference when people share our content. It helps these interviews get out there so everyone can hear our experts like Anka tonight and try and pick his brain and his knowledge in different areas. And it's been a pleasure to have you on tonight, Adam. Pleasure as always. And we'll see everyone next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you
very much.
Yeah.